going in for a you know. Okay.
Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Samach Aleph in Gitin, as we went for a Fushlam for Lazar ben Reuma and for Yosef Shil ben Chaim Yichal. Says the Gemara, the last line on Samach Amid Beis. That's where yesterday's daf took us up to. Metzudas Chai ba'opus dag yesh b'mishum, with the concern about what's the Darkei Shalom. That's what we're talking about. We went from Tikkun Olam, they Tikkun Olam, and to Darkei Shalom for things of peace. Meaning, if people set up traps and they don't really own the property yet, they don't own the animal or the bird or whatever it is that they're trapping, the fish. They don't really own them yet. They make a kinyan. Still, because of Darkei Shalom, you shouldn't take it. You shouldn't steal the stuff out of the traps. So the Gemara says, if you're talking about traps that have bottoms to it, so it's like your chutzner. Your item, the item that you're trapping fell into your chutzner, into your possession, fell into your box, so to speak. Usually a rishatot, or nets made out of threads. Rashi says, Neuri made out of bulrushes, like bushes, things like that sort that have a bottom to it. There's some substance to it, and you could say that the item fell into your property. Then Kuliyam Pligi says the Gemara at the top of Samach Aleph, but he agrees that that's certainly your konet. It's Gezel Gomer because it fell into your property. Once it's in your property, you acquired it, even though you weren't there at the time that it was trapped, but you set it up that it should be trapped in your property. It's like something fell into your chutzner, it's yours. If it came from Hefker. The kipligi machlok is only if you trapped it with, let's say, lechi is like a chakal, like a hook, like a fishing rod or a hook, and kukri are also other kinds of traps that don't have bottoms to it. So there was no kinyan made by the person who laid the trap, and but Darkei Shalom, you shouldn't take the stuff if he set it up. It's not proper to take it away from him. And see, it's Rav Gezel Gomer. So he said that something that the finds, since they don't have the ability to make a kinyan min Torah, so technically they don't own it. But because of Darkei Shalom, if they found it, you shouldn't take it away from them. That was what the Tanakhama said. Yosef says it's Gezel Gomer, it's stealing, literally stealing. How is that Gezel Gomer? Min Torah, they can't make a kinyan. So Amrav Chista Gezel Gomer Devrayim. It's only Gezel Gomer min Rabbanan. But these are both Rabbanans. On the one hand, we say the rabbis made a takana that because of Darkei Shalom, you shouldn't take away anything that a Cheresh HaTakadon finds, even though he can't make a kinyan in it, but he found it, don't take it away from him. And Yossi says, no, it's actually stealing Midrabanan. Ma'naf Kamina, can you take it out in court? If the reason is because of Darkei Shalom, it's not a good thing to do. You shouldn't take away things that a Cheresh HaTakadon finds. It's improper to do. But if you did it, you're not a nice person, but the judges can't take it away from you. But if you say it's Gezel Gomer Midrabanan, the rabbi said no. The rabbi said it belongs to the kid. They have the power to take it away from you and give it to them. Then technically, if somebody on behalf of the Cheresh HaTakadon had a lawyer or an adult or something who took care of the business and took it to court, the Cheresh HaTakadon would be allowed to acquire it in court. The court would assign it to him. Ani Menak Rosh Hashanah also mashdach. We said if an ani is cutting down olives at the top of a tree and some fell down, he owns them too, even though he didn't make a kinyan yet. If he actually picked them up in his hands, he made a kinyan, and then it's literally stealing. Rav Kana story. Rav Kana went to the town of Hutzal. He saw a man He saw a man throwing branches, let's say, or throwing rods, and the dates would fall off. Then this Rav Kana went. He picked some up, and he picked up some of the dates, and he ate them. So the man on the tree, he saw a man that was throwing. He wasn't at the top of the tree. He was throwing branches. It's not clear from Rashi's Mashma. He was throwing branches and throwing rods to knock the dates off. But according to Rashi's interpretation, Tosafos says that's pretty hard to understand. Why would this guy do it? It says, how could he take it? It's obvious that this man's trying to get the dates. So why would Rav Kana take it away, pick them up, and eat them himself? Tosafos learns more that he was knocking down the branches. The poor person was knocking the branches, and Rav Kana thought that he wanted the branches, not the dates. So he was eating the dates. I put them down there with my hand. In other words, I acquired the dates. He told Rav Kana that I acquired the dates in my hands, therefore you shouldn't take them. I see you know the halacha. I see you come from the town of Yoshi, meaning Husel was Rav Yoshia's town, and therefore you attended his shiurim, and you know the rules. The rules are that if dates of the dates of the olives, whatever it was, fell off the tree while you were cutting them down, you didn't really acquire them yet, only Dark Shalom. But once you picked them up in your hands, and they're literally yours, and that's why you had a valid claim. Not clear why he called it Tzadik Yisod Olam. It'd be a Tzadik, but he was a Tzadik because he went to the Shiur of Rav Yoshia. But the idea is the same, that if they just fell off while the person was knocking them down, then it's a Dark Shalom. Even though he didn't acquire them, you shouldn't take them. But if he actually picked them up in his hand, then it's really Gezel. When poor Jews are gathering leket, the gleanings, the shicha, the forgotten sheaves on the ground of a pay, the corner of the field. So and Goyim also join them. They see the Jews are giving away stuff from their fields for the poor people, and Goyim join them. Poor Goyim join them too. So you don't block them from entering, and you let them collect. Also, Dr. Shalom let them have some of the stuff too. It's not considered helping the Goyim. Dr. Shalom, it's okay. In fact, you support the poor Goyim with the poor Jews. And that's if they have a fund, whatever it's called, for helping poor people, and you're helping Jews, you can help Goyim with them too because of Darkei Shalom. That people should live together in peace and harmony. You don't say we're only helping the Jews, not the Goyim. Even though, are you assisting a Goy? Not technically, you can't assist a Goy in Avodah Zarah or something that's if he's an over an Aveira. But here you're just helping them live. You're letting them take them your poor from your field, and if it's charity, you need to help them. In other words, it's nothing wrong with giving. What's the big projects in America? I forget what they're called. The big funds for helping the poor.
United Way.
Yeah, United Way or something like that. If you give a check to the United Way, it's not a terrible thing. That's what he's saying. So you go to visit the sick Jewish people, you can visit the Nachum also. You bury their dead. It says with Mesa, so it doesn't mean in the same cemetery. It just means that you can help them bury their dead if they find dead people or killed or whatever. You want to help them. All those things you're allowed to do because of ways of peace. So again, you're not helping them do an Aveira for them. In other words, if you're helping them do Avodah Zarah or something of other Zion, Mrs. B'nai Noach, something like that, you can't help them go against something that's forbidden for them. But you can help them live in the normal things that you do, that help the poor, visit the sick, bury the dead, because of Darkei Shalom. So you should live in peace and prosperity with the Goyim. Now we're talking about Darkei Shalom, even when it affects Jews who aren't so righteous. What do we mean? Let's say a Jewish woman, we'll call her the frum lady, can she lend her friend who is suspected of not keeping the rules of Shemitah? The rules of Shemitah are that you're allowed to, take the produce from the field, and you have to be mafkir for everybody else, but you can't keep it past the date in which there's no more animals in the field eating that stuff. Let's say she's suspected of storing the shviyah. So you have a friend. We have a frum lady and her friend. The friend is suspected of not keeping laws of shviyas. Still, you can lend her your various kitchen utensils, like a sifter, a kivra, a sieve, rechaim as a small hand mill, the tanur, a small oven. In those days, the ovens were all made out of klicheres, were all earthenware vessels. You're allowed to lend her those things because you're not directly helping her in her, let's say, violation of shviyas laws. But don't select fruit, vegetables or grains with her, and don't grind with her. In other words, don't process the food with her. You're allowed to lend her your utensils because you don't know for sure that she's going to be using them for shviyas, right? She's suspected of not keeping shviyas, this friend. But not necessarily. You're not helping her directly. You're just helping her use your utensils. But you can't actually process the food with her, whether it's selecting, grinding, or whatever. Why? Because now you're helping her do an aveira. You're helping her deal with the shvius, which she's not allowed to keep at that time. Similarly, Eishes Chaver, again, the wife of a Talmud Chacham, also Eishes Amaretz can lend to the wife of an Aretz, Nafa B'Kivra, let's say a sifter or a sieve, Ubareres, but here he says it's different. The lady who was suspected of shvius, you're allowed to help her, but not directly with the food. Don't touch the food. When it comes to Eishes Amaretz, it says not only can you lend her the utensils, but Ubareres, you can select the chenes and grind or chenes and sift with her. Now, what's the difference? Why, when it comes to shvius, lady who suspected of shvius, you cannot touch the food with her, process the food. And when it comes to Eishes Chaver, could lend to an Amaretz and even help her along. We more or less Akasha immediately. But once she puts water on the grain, once she puts water on there, now it's mukhshel l'kabel tuma, right? Now it's fit to be it's susceptible now for defilement because it's gotten wet. Lo sima, then you can't touch it. You don't support the hands of the Avera. You don't help them. So here, now, how is she in over an Avera? Is it because she's an Amaretz, she's the wife of an Amaretz, and therefore she's not keeping Trumas and Meisers, or is it Tumah? What's the discussion? The Gemara will talk about that. But the Gemara the Mishnah makes a difference in the wife of a woman the woman who's suspected of shvius. You can't process any food with her. You can lend her the kitchen utensils, but you can't process the food. The wife of an Amaretz, you're allowed to help process the food, but not once it becomes susceptible to Tumah. But cool, and all these things that we're allowed to do, in other words, you're allowed to do these things that we're matter to lend them kalim and to help them when they're not actually doing the Avera, just to help them along. That's only because of Darkei Shalom. But you can't actually help them do the Avera. So if they're suspected of being over on Shemitah, you can't actually process food with them. Also, Goyim, who are processing food which is shvius food in Eretz Yisrael, you're allowed to help them. Again, here it's mashma literally help them. Why are you allowed to help them? You can't help the Jews. Why can you help the Goyim? So the Gemara will explain that you're not really helping them. The Gemara will talk about that in tomorrow's daf. Avalo yidei Yisrael. But if a Jew is processing shvius food and being over on laws of Shemitah, you can't help them. B'shalom b'shlomim, you're also allowed to greet them, to greet the Goyim, Darkei Shalom. And Rashi says, even though using the word Shalom Aleichem, using Hashem's name, you're allowed to greet Goyim and say good morning. Better just say good morning. Tzafar Nahar, say good morning. But if you say Shalom Aleichem using God's name, but even that you could do because of Darkei Shalom to foster peace among people. My Shabbat say the Gemara is right away the question we brought up. Why in the Reisha by Shvius we say you cannot help her process the food when it comes to a woman who's suspected of being over on Shemitah rules. And when it comes to the Seifa, a wife of Menaretz, you're allowed to help her with the food too, as long as it doesn't become tamei. Once she puts water on it and become tamei, then you can't. So what's the difference? So Abai's answer is very simple. She didn't say that she's suspected of being over on Meiser. Most Amars are Maser. We keep rules of Demai because there's a miyat that doesn't keep the rules of Meiser. But in other words, the difference between the first case, she's suspected of not keeping Shvius laws. In the second case, she's just the wife of Menaretz. We don't suspect her being over on Meiser. Most Amaratzim do separate Meiser and give it to the proper people. So that's Abai's answer. Rabbi says no. It's very simple. It could be it's 50-50 in both cases. 50 people, 50% of the Amaratzim give Meiser, 50% don't. So there is reason to suspect her of not giving Trumas and Meisers. Rabbi says, Rav Meir. We're talking about the Amars of Rav Meir, not the Amars that we always understand, Amars who's suspected of not giving Meiser, but we're talking about the Amars of Rav Meir Shita, the Tumah V'tar Drabanan. And the only issue over here is it could be Tamei Midrabanan, not Tamei Midaraisa. What do we mean by that? That it's not an Isser. The only thing that's usher to eat the state of Tumah is Kachim and Truma. But Chulin is not really Minatorah. You could eat Chulin if it's Tamei. Or if you're a Tamei, there's no Isser. It's only this on people who are very righteous and they want to keep even Chulin B'tara. So that's what we're speaking about over here. We're talking about an Amaretz Rav Meir. What do we mean by that? The Tanya Eis Amaretz, Koshen Chulin B'tara. The Rav Meir says an Amaretz is the person who doesn't eat Chulin B'tara. He doesn't eat Chulin B'tara. That's an Amaretz. So here we're talking about somebody who doesn't eat it B'tara. We're not talking about somebody who doesn't keep Trumas and Meisers. We're talking about he's an Amaretz. Trumas and Meisers he might keep. But we're talking about a person who doesn't keep Chulin is chulin v'tara, which is not an issur daraisa. Chum says the person doesn't give his meisers. Truma they give, because that's if you eat truma, if you eat tevel or truma, you chayav misa b'dei shemayim. But the meiser, not such a big deal, so I'll cheat the Levi out of it. So the Chum say it's kosher masa perosa, but according to Rav Meir, an amoritz simply person doesn't eat chulin b'tara, and therefore over here we're speaking about when he said the wife of Amar, just speaking about somebody who doesn't keep this chulin b'tara, and therefore you're allowed to process food with him as long as it hasn't become wet yet. That's what the Mishnah said. Once it becomes wet, you got to be concerned. So we're talking about what? So why is it tumen tara drabanan? Because we're talking about chulin over here. We're not talking about truma. We're talking about chulin. So he doesn't need chulin b'tara. So you can process with him until it becomes wet. Once it becomes wet, it could become tamei, and therefore you should refrain from processing the food with him. But midikani seifa. But since the seifa says once it gets water in it, you shouldn't touch it. Must be speaking that the Reisha is not Tumantara. The Reisha simply says that if a from woman or Eishes Chaber can lend Eishes Amar, it's enough of a kibra, and there's no concern at all about Tumah. We're not talking about Tumantara. Rash says there's no concern of Eir of Tumah. The Lohuchshuru. In other words, since the Sefer says they were mukshur afterwards, he got wet. Mash the Reisha, that there's no concern about it. There was no shur. So if she's believed on Meiser, there's no problem over here. If we're talking about something which is not, there's no concern about Tumas Meiser, according to Rav Meir. All you're concerned about is Tumantara. But it can't become Tamiyah because the Sefer says if it became wet, then you're concerned about Tumantara. Smash with the Reisha is not concerned about Tumah. So why do you say the heter is only because of dark Shalom? The heter is because there's no reason to be concerned. There's no Tumantara if it hasn't become wet yet, and there's no problem with Tumas or Meisers. So Medically said Shasamayim, let's see Mechal the Reisha, Lava Tumatara skin. The more no Reisha and Sefer Tumatara. Both the Reisha and the Sefer are speaking about issues of Tumatara. The Reisha but Tumaschulin, the Sefer Tumaschala. That's what we mean over here. The Reisha speaking about Tumaschulin. Tumaschulin, there's no concern about. Right? Rashi says Reisha v'Sefer Tumatara when Paris Muksharan. Right? The Paris are Mukshal couple. The Reisha calls man Shal Gilgula Ein El Tumaschulin Rabbanan. The Reisha is speaking about as long as she hasn't kneaded the dough, processed the dough, it's tumatara, it's mukshal kapal tuma, but it's only drabanan. Don't eat it. It's tamei, but it's only tumah drabanan, and therefore, if it's only drabanan, the rabbanan did not deter you from helping this eishes ha'maaretz because of darkei shalom, because there's no tumah d'oraisa over here. It's only tumas chulin. Even though you shouldn't eat tumas chulin, they're not makbid about it as long as there's no tumah d'oraisa. No, there's no isser. It doesn't mean that there's no. It's tamei. The chulin is tamei, but there's no isser of eating chulin tamei menatorah. The isser is only eating truma or challah. The sefer is speaking about when you begun to knead it, when she puts water on there, and then you begin to knead the dough. Then, in preparation for taking off challah, that's when you take challah. Challah is truma, and chula and truma, which is tamei. That's already an Isser d'oraisa for somebody to eat. So Reisha v'Sefer Tumas v'Tara, says the Gemara. The last line. The Reisha b'Tumas chulin. The Reisha is speaking about Tumas chulin, who was tamei chulin because it was mushal kabel tuma, and the concern is, are you helping somebody of Avera? Okay, the Tumas chulin is not also d'oraisa. Therefore, if you help her, it's only an Isser d'Rabbanan, and you're allowed to do it for darkei shalom. The Seifa, it says once it became wet, and now you're processing it, you're kneading it, and you're going to be mafish challah. Now you don't want it to become tamei because that's already an issur d'oraisa. It says Rashi, the last line, the sefer becomes challah d'oraisa should also tama biyad. You can't be metame truma or challah by hand. As Mishmeres, the pasuk says, as Mishmeres truma say, avalei shimur. You got to be careful. So that's the point of the Mishnah, that both we're talking about where the stuff could become tamei, even before the sefer that says that once you put water on, it was really tamei before too, but before it was only chulin becoming tamei is only an isser d'rabbanan. Therefore, you can help her because of darkei shalom. But in the sefer, it's speaking about where you're going to be mafish challah. Mafish challah is already the isser is being metamei challah or truma min Torah. That's already an isser d'oraisa. You shouldn't help her with that. In other words, you shouldn't help her to be over. Shouldn't help over Avera on an Isser d'oraisa.
What's the status of the challah though? already subject to one?
No. Once
I'm not talking about helping, about,
no, as long as it's not in the dough state yet, there's no challah. Challah is only once it's dough. So we're saying you can process the grain and grind and stuff like that because it's only chulin. Once though you put water on it and you're starting to turn it into dough, then it could become tumah d'oraisa. What's it? Yeah. No, I'm saying as long as it's chulin, chulin that's tameh, and then you say now you put the water on it, you're making dough out of it, right?
So the dough is fine, but when the woman who's making the Amaret's woman is making dough, and she takes off challah,
but it's tameh. Then it's tameh. It's tameh.
It's tameh. So what, she just burns it?
Oh, what should she do with it?
I mean,
she doesn't know. In other words, we'll talk about a case like that. Once, if a Kohen gets challah, right, it's given challah truma from an oritz, you got to be careful. Yeah, you have to assume it's tameh, which means it's a problem because you're not allowed to burn it unless you know it's for sure tameh, right? So it's a problem. You have to just leave it, and that's it. Better for the Kohen not to deal with those kind of people. So that's what he says. So as long as you're processing it in the state of chulin, it's only nisud rabbanan. But if you can get it tumah d'oraisa, because water's on it now, then you got to be careful. Don't touch it.
Should make the challah.
Right.
Go speak.
Right. Work it out. That's right. For a minute, we have a kash on this. It says tochen at the top of base now. Let's say you have some grain, you can grind it and you can give it eitzel ochle shvius. Even a person who eats shvius, in violation. You can leave your stuff with them. It is you can leave stuff with a person who eats shmita when he shouldn't be eating it. In other words, you don't have to be concerned about it. Wow. Or give it to people who eat their peiros b'tumah. You're allowed to do that. But the people who eat shvius, you can't process their food. You can't grind and store their food because their food we assume is no good. It's shvius food. Or people who ate their peiros b'tumah. So if they eat peiros b'tumah, again, only iser drabanan. Peiros are only iser drabanan if they become tamei. You can't store stuff with them. You're allowed to store your own food with them. Your own food them you can keep, but you can't process their food. So how do we say over here that you could? That our Mishnah says that you're allowed to. In case of Mishnah said that avalo lochlish from shalom rebeir ain't talking osa lehem she'osa l'sam b'brasum asisik tari tochen esimah makemes laba ochel chulum b'tumah. Our Mishnah says people you eat chulum b'tumah, right? So you can process the food, like this case of the Yesha Sama Oretz. Our Mishnah says you can grind the food and you can sift with her. You could sift with her because it's only chulum b'tumah. Here it says you're not allowed to process their food. L'ochle shviyas, not your food. The people who for their food, ochle shviyas or ochle peiros b'tumah, you're not allowed to process their food. You can't grind with them, etc., and store with them. There we're talking about a Kohen. This Bryson on the base is talking about a Kohen who's suspected of eating truma b'tumah. He's talking about an issur d'oraisa. That's different. Kohen is suspected. We're only talking about in our Mishnah a Yesha Sama Oretz who doesn't eat chulin b'tara, who eats chulin b'tumah, but not somebody who's suspected of eating truma b'tumah. So that's why our Mishnah allows you. Definitely tumah d'oraisa, says the Gemara. It's a tumah d'oraisa. Tumah d'oraisa, you're not allowed to, if she's suspected of that, you can't process any food with her. So if that's the case, if we're talking about tumah d'oraisa, why are you allowed to, if you're talking about putting your food with somebody, storing it with somebody who's suspected of being over on truma b'tumah, which is an issur d'oraisa, mafkidin, why are you allowed to store stuff with them? For a minimum, mafkidin truma eitzel Yisrael amaretz. You're allowed to put truma by Yisrael amaretz for lo eitzel kohen amaretz, not a kohen amaretz. They should leave a gaspa. A kohen gets truma all the time. So if you leave truma with a kohen who's an amaretz, he's not so careful about it because he's accustomed to always having truma around. He's not careful with it, and he might be matameh it. So how can you give it? How does this Bryce say you can't that you're allowed to you're not allowed to. So how do we say over here? Why do we say you're allowed to put your food, not his food? His food, you're helping him. You can't be Messiah, but your food you're allowed to leave with a ochle shvius or eitzel ochle peres betuma, which we're saying now is a kohen who eats his peres betuma, meaning he's over on a doraisa. How can you leave your food with him? We say over here, mafkidin truma eitzel Yisrael amaretz, because he's going to be careful. Yisrael amaretz, it's truma, I'm not going to touch it. But a kohen amaretz who's used to it, he's used to it, you can't leave your truma with him because he might be metamiyah. So how do you say at the top of the page over this price says talking about eating eitzel ochel shvius eitzel ochel peres betuma, and you said that's speaking about a kohen who's over on truma d'oraisa and he's metamiyah. He's not careful about the truma, which is tameh. We're speaking about over here about you gave it to him when you're allowed to the top line here that says you're allowed to leave it with him. Your truma, you're allowed to leave with him. And you can leave with him. You're not worried about him being metamiyah. We're speaking about it's in a kli cheres which is sealed. The kli cheres which is sealed is only metamiyah on the inside, not on the outside. Since it's sealed, he won't be metamiyah. If his wife is a nida, we're talking about a person who doesn't keep all the halachas. If his wife is a nida, she might move it. And a nida is metami, something which she moves, even if it's inside a kli cheres, which is sealed. Anything that she moves is tummy, not just so she doesn't have to touch it, she just has to move it. So still, so how can you leave it with him? If you're talking about a kohen who keeps stuff, who's not careful with tumah, how can you leave stuff with him? The Bryce on this page, which says that first part is speaking about, it's talking about peiros which were not yet mushal kabel tumah. That's why you're allowed to keep it with them, because it can't become tummy. They're not mushal kabel tumah. So if you give it to him in a sealed jar or whatever, however you keep it, as long as you're not going to touch it, that's fine, because it's not mushal kabel tumah. That's what Rashi means. Take a look at Rashi Khan, right in where we are. The second part of the Bryce, which says you can't be mafkid something of theirs with them. You can't leave something of theirs if they're suspected. Both of us speaking about truma. You don't have to say one speaking about chul, one speaking about truma. We're talking about both of them truma. Also, why can't you help them with theirs? Because you don't know if it's moksher or not. It could be it's moksher kabatuma, so you can't help them. It's moksher kabatuma, and they're suspected of being violating the rules of truma and making it tameh. You can't do it. So that's what the Mishnah said. The Bryce says talking about the where it's not moksher kabatuma, so it can't become tameh. For a minute, let's say you take your wheat to a grinder. They would have professional grinders in those days. You know, they'd have a special mill, and that you would take it, have him grind it for you. If he's a kuti, like a goy or a Jew doesn't keep the rules, you can assume that from Meiser Shvius, you can assume he didn't switch. He didn't switch it. You gave him this batch to grind. You can assume that it's the same. He's giving back the same batch, whether it's Meiser or Shvius. If you're allowed to process it, you can assume that it's the same stuff you gave him. But he could have defiled it. So over here, so what are we saying? We just said if it's mushal kabel tuma, then there's a problem. If it's not mushal kabel tuma, you can leave with him. Over here, you see that if you give it to him, you're not worried about him switching it, maybe putting something else. Let's say you gave him good food and he gave him shviyas food, which has to be destroyed by a certain time, or you gave him meiser and he kept it and gave you something else and gave you something which is not the meiser. You don't have to be concerned about that, but tuma you have to be concerned about. So here you see you are concerned about tuma. Says, hi, my room. Why is that a kasha? Didn't we explain that when are you allowed to give it to him? The peiros shelo huchshuru, peiros that were not mushal kabel tuma. So of course you have to be concerned about tuma. The case of a malachut, you say not worried about switching, but you are worried about tuma. That's if the peiros were mushal kabel tuma. Where we say you're allowed to give him the stuff and not be concerned about it at all is if it wasn't mushal kabel tuma. So the Karila Makar, what was your hapmina? Obviously, we already made a difference between pairs which are mushal kabel tuma versus not mushal. If it's not mushal kabel tuma, there's no concern. He's not going to be matama then. He can't be matama because he's not mushal kabel tuma. They haven't been damp and they haven't been wet yet. But if it's a concern, if they are mushal kabel tuma, then you are concerned. What was your hapmina? Because we want to ask another kasha on that. In other words, in the first price that we had on this page, it didn't mention anything about Amaretz, just as Ochle Shvias, it's also present Matuma. But here, in this price, we asked the Kasha Molachid and Latochen Kuti Latochen Amaretz. So now we're asking Kasha from Amaretz. In other words, you're right. There's no concern. The Tum and Tara we've dealt with already. In our Mishnah, we've explained that if you go like a Baya, they say the concern in the safe is about Amaretz. So Rav Amaretz are Masr, there's no concern. Rabbi gave us the whole spiel and said, no, we're going like Rav Meir, that we're talking about an Amaretz who's simply not, he doesn't keep his chul and Betara. So for him, since it's not an Issa D'Oraisa, the Dark Shalom, you're allowed to help him. But if there's an Issa D'Oraisa, you're talking about Truma or Chala, whereas an Issa D'Oraisa being Matamet, then you have to be concerned and you can't help him at all. Then we brought down the Bryce with Tochem Afkid Eitzel Shvius Eitzel Ocha Peres B'Tuma. She said there you're allowed to, where it's not Moshel Kabel Tuma. But if it's Moshel Kabel Tuma, that's a problem. But then we asked this Kasha from Molachit L'Tochem that you are worried about Tuma. Says that's not a problem because there was Moshel Kabel Tuma, or you don't know it's Moshel Kabel Tuma. So what was the Kasha? It wasn't a Kasha there. The Kasha was you're worried about switching. We want to ask a different Kasha. We're halfway down on base in the Gemara. Allah, we want to ask a different Kasha. You say if you give something to a kuti Ma'aretz, you can assume he's giving you back the same produce that you gave. He gave us a batch there, he gave you back the same batch. You're not worried that he did a switch. And you're not worried that he might switch it for a minute. Let's say you gave some grain or some dough to your mother-in-law to process for you. She's going to bake it, she's going to grind it, process it, whatever you gave it. So Ma'aser and this mother-in-law is the husband, your father-in-law's an Amaretz. So number one, you send her to the mikveh, so she shouldn't be metame what you gave her. But it says Ma'aser shenoslan, you should give meiser on the stuff you give her. You have to give meiser before, because you're concerned maybe she's going to take that and keep it for herself, and she's going to eat some. That's your man. What you get back from her, you also have to give meiser on that because you're afraid that she switched it. Right? Because you're concerned, she's suspected of switching the bad stuff for the good stuff. In other words, she wants to give her daughter good stuff, right? So if you gave her some stuff and it's getting old, so she's suspected that I'll keep the old stuff and I'll give my daughter the good stuff. So she might switch it. So you see over here, you are concerned about switching. Why do you say if you give something to an Amaretz or a Kuti, the concern is only if they're Matami, if it was Moshel Kabatoma. Not concerned about switching it and Meiser and Shvius, etc. Here you see you are concerned. You're concerned that she might do the switch. Says Hassan,
sex maker there. She's switching it with Meiser, and it's also.
It's not a sex fake. It's one suffix. She might switch it.
One is Tameh and one is.
The concern is not about Tumah. The concern is not about Tumah. He sent it to the mikveh, so there's no concern about Tumah. The concern is only that she might switch it. That you gave her food that was gemeiser and ready to eat. And she gave you back something which was not nicer yet.
Okay.
That's the concern. There's only one concern.
Not Tameh.
Not you went to the mikveh. Right. She went to the mikveh. Rashi tells you right away. To prepare it. He sent it to the mikveh. He says, I know, we know that you don't keep all the rules, so you put her in the mikveh first. Okay. Still, he has to be concerned that she switched the food. So you see, you do have to be concerned. How do you say over here if you give גיטין to a grinder who's a goy or an Amaretz, you have to be concerned that only for Tumah. You don't have to be concerned about Meiser and Shvius. Why? Maybe they would switch it like this mother-in-law. Says Hassan could time there was a different reason. She wants her daughter to have fresh food. She's embarrassed from the son-in-law. In other words, she doesn't want to give back the food when she prepares the food and bakes it and gives it back to them. They want to say, "Oh, this cake is delicious. It's the good." So she wants to give them fresh food. She saw when the son-in-law gave her the food that it wasn't so fresh and it wasn't going to be so good. So she might switch it. In other words, she had good intentions. Over there was a special case. She had good intentions. She had reason to switch it. But normally you don't have to be concerned that somebody's just going to switch it. But normally you're not concerned about switching. By the time you learn this, because there's the yeshiva boys, Talmud, that was learning by his Rebbe in the yeshiva. So where did they stay? They didn't have dorms in those days. You stayed by an inn, and you give her food to prepare for you. You give her some grain to prepare. So he gave us food. The Talmud, the yeshiva boy gave the food to this pundikus, to the innkeeper. Again, the same thing. Maser shenos. He takes meiser what he gave her in case she switches and keeps his food. that she be gemais. He doesn't want her to be nechshel because of him. With navel osit mishel. That shehuna talimen. And when he gets back from her, also he has to take too much ma'aser because he's afraid she did the switch. So what's your reason of that? Because she's assumed that she might switch it. There she says, Rashi says that she's a tzaddikus. She also means for good. She says, I'd rather give the yeshiva boy good food. I'll give her fresh, hot, warm food, and I'll keep the old stuff, the old stale stuff. In other words, there she might switch it also for a reason. Tosfos learns the other way around. That it's a question. She says, she says what? I should eat he should eat the fresh stuff, and I should eat the bad, the good, good stuff. He's a kid in the yeshiva. I'm keeping him over here. I should eat the rotten stuff. Let him eat the rotten stuff, and I'll eat it. Right. Let him eat the old stuff, and I'll eat the fresh stuff. Because Rav Tosfos says Hasam Mora, and Mora is like Mora Heter. She finds a Heter for herself. But either way, there's a reason why she would switch it. We're not worried about switching normally, only in those cases, the mother-in-law or the pundikus matanya. If a Eishes Chaver is Tameh, she's Tameh, she can also grind with an Eishes Hamoritz because it's all Tameh anyway. She knows she's not going to feed it to her husband who's keeping stuff bitar or whatever. You're allowed to, okay. Avalov is man shitor. Not if she's tar. If she's tar, she shouldn't grind. In other words, she shouldn't process food together with the wife of an arts because the wife of an arts is going to be tummy the food. We're talking about where's Moshe Kabal Tumah. Shimmer Lazar Omer Afis man she tmeya. Even when she's tummy, she's low titchon. She shouldn't grind with her. Neishachaverta no senaslav ochelas because her friend. In other words, it's not like if they bought something together, or let's say the Eishes Chaver has some food. And she says, come and help me process the food. So if the Eishes Chaver is Tameh, he says, no problem. You're all Tameh anyway, not a problem. But if she's tar, she shouldn't process the food with the Eishes Hamoritz because the Eishes Hamoritz is going to be Tameh the food. Right? Rav Shapiro says, no. Even when she's Tameh, she shouldn't grind with her. Why? Because the wife of Haaretz might supplement the food with food that she stole from her husband. But it says, because she might take other food there. Rashi says, the top line of Rashi, Am Chashud Eishes Hamoritz, Ligno Mishabal, to steal her husband's food. So you see also that people can switch. Maybe she'll switch it. She'll put some of her food in there. Gemara says Hashna Miknev Ganav Lo. In other words, again, that's part of the kasha. If she's going to steal from her husband, certainly she would switch. Here we're not talking about switching. If she's going to steal, certainly she would switch. Stealing means she's going to steal. Take her husband's food and put it in there. If she's going to steal, certainly she would switch. Where you're switching, it's not stealing so much, right? You're more ahead. I'm just switching one for another. I'm not really stealing. She's also more ahead. She finds an excuse. Why? She says, Vamra, an ox can eat from what he threshes. In other words, I'm entitled to eat over here. I'm processing the food. I'm the wife in the house. I'm processing the food. I'm allowed to take food from my husband. I'm allowed to do that. It's not just only the fact you're allowed to. A worker is allowed to eat from the food that he processes also for that reason. So there she's moraheta, but normally they're not moraheta. Normally, if you give food even to an amoretz and you say to process it, they keep an honest ledger, and what you gave them, they give you back. They don't switch. Only in these cases where they're moraheta. Hey, Rabbi Yosef, but I'm showing Mishum Rabbi Yochanan. We gave a testimony in the name of Rabbi Yosef, gave in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, his brother, as Rabbi Yochanan Mishulam. He said, "Ein osin chasamas betara." You don't process the challah of an amoretz b'tahara. Avlosin isas chulin b'tahara. What does it mean? You don't make challah if it's already dough. You don't process it b'tahara. Why? Let's say you're the kneader. You do the kneading, K-N-E-A-D, right? You're doing the kneading. You don't do the chalas. Why? Because if the amoretz already gave you dough, it's already tamei, right? You already tamei. So if you process it now and be mafresh the challah for him and give it to the Kohen, the Kohen's going to think it's okay because you're an honest observant Jew. Avalosin isas chulin b'tara, but let's say it's chulin, meaning it hasn't yet been processed, hasn't yet been made into dough. So now it's still like in the grain form. It's still it's not tamei yet, not tamei min Torah. It's not tamei in the rules of the Torah. Avalosin isas chulin b'tara. What you could do is this: if he gives you in the grain form where it's not yet tamei, he hasn't been over anything yet, and the stuff is not mushal kabel tamei yet. That's what we mean over here. It's not mushal kabel tamei, meaning it hasn't been wet yet. Rashi says, Rashi in the third line at March, said Gav Chaver to a kneader who's a Tam Chacham, Hafish Chami Sasi Basei Tara Lo Yishmalo. It's already tummy, right? In other words, when you're processing it originally, when he hasn't been metame it yet, you're allowed to process it originally when it's tar and process it and knead it and be mafresh the challah and give him back the challah. You could put it in a kind of a kli, which is not makabel tamar. Rashi says it's like a kli made from worn out old leather jugs. They used to use like leather jugs, leather chemas, like a chemas mine. They put water in there, and they made it from there, so it's not makabel tumah because it's made out of these. It's something which is not makabel tumah, and made out of these worn out parts, and put it in there. And because it's in there, he won't touch it. And the Amaretz will come and he'll take. You can give him the regular dough, and you can give him the challah and choshesh. You're not worried that he's going to be mitam because he knows he does. The Amaretz wants to give challah, but if he already gave it to you in dough form, you can't because he was already mitamid. Similarly, let's say processing his olives. If he gave it to you already in the vat, it could already be mushal kabel tumah. If you take them in its original form and they haven't yet mushal kabel tumah yet, you can do that batar, but not limit you can mafresh truma. Some say that it means the mafresh should actually make it into oil when it's really truma d'oraisa. When put it in the caleb of the chaver in his caleb. When the Amaretz comes to take it, note l'shtein, then choshesh where he's going to tamid. The time of my, why do we allow this? Even though he's not Amaretz, why do we allow it? The badad. You're concerned about the livelihood of the kneader and the person who processes the oil, the olives to make them oil, the whatever you call that, the olive maker, the olive oil maker, because they need we will allow them to do this. If you're careful, you're allowed to do it and give it back to them because of the livelihood. They need to have a livelihood, the kneader and the olive processor. Why do you tell me both cases of the olives and the cases of the dough? If he gets a very low wage, kneading is a very low paid wage. So you might think for him, he needs it for his livelihood. So you allow him to do it in that way where he doesn't take the dough from an Amaretz, because that could already be tamei, takes it in its original form before it became tamei. An olive maker, it's more, I guess, of a learned trade. It's more of an you have to be an expert in how to do it. So he gets a bigger wage, and we're not matter there. You don't think sort of like the olives only processed at a certain time, a certain season of the year. So maybe there you have to be concerned about his livelihood. But a kneader processes food all year round, and you have to be concerned. Shricha there tells me in both cases, because of their livelihood, you allow them to take the unprocessed food of an Amaretz, process it, and give it back to them, keeping the challah or the truma separate from the chulin, and you're not worried that they're going to be tamid. Amar Mar notle menik de challah menicha bekvisha b'anchusa ukshaba Amaretz. We just understand. You're not concerned that he's going to be mitamei the challah or the truma. Why aren't you concerned? Maybe he's going to touch it. It says the Amalei, he said to him, Chazi, look, if you touch it, it's going to become tevel again. In other words, all the work that you just paid me for will be null and void. You'll have to start all over again. Maybe he doesn't care. He's coming to me and talking. What is he coming? He says, listen, process my food for me here. Knead the food, knead the dough, or process the olives, and be mafish the challah, the truma. He's trying to fix it. He wouldn't care about it. Of course he'd care about it. Okay, that all works by the kneader because you're putting it in those kalim, the kfisha, the anchusa, by the olives. When you put in his kalim, when it comes to taking note, he takes both the truma and the chulin. You're not worried that he's going to tame. Like, why aren't you worried he's going to might touch it? So Bishlam Hasam is in the case of the dough, there's a hecker because he put it in those special vessels that are not makabel tamah. But if you put it just in regular vessels, how is it evident from the vessels that this is that this is truma and you can't be makabel tamah and the other one's not? You put it in kalim which are not makabel tamah, kalim that were made from animal dung or from a stone or from earth that's not makabel tamah. Why talk about the kalim of the chaver? Even the kalim of Amaretz are not makabel tamah. as much as an Amoritz wants to, he can't be makabel these kind of kelim that I'm makabel tuma. That's what it means. But kelim shel ma'aretz, it's the kelim of ma'aretz haru'uim l'shtam shel that even a tam chacham could use because they're not makabel tuma. So again, the idea is that as long as it's not something which is going to involve a tuma d'oraisa of truma or chal, then you're allowed to help an Amoritz in any form, as long as it can't become tamei. As long as there's no tumah d'oraisa. All right, we'll pick up from the 2 dots. Tomorrow is Monday. We'll pick it up from there tomorrow. We'll start the next pair. Shavuot.